Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Leadership Studio. I'm very excited today to be joined by someone who's a spectacular human being and a tremendous coach. Corena Chase is here today. She's a communication and leadership coach. She has a ton of experience with both global Fortune 500 companies, smaller companies, individuals, you name it. She's an amazing communication coach. She's great at teaching leadership. She works with tons of different organizations. She works with industries in financial services, in law, in venture capital, tech, media. But I brought her in today because a lot of you have been asking about kind of the art of coaching, how you get better at coaching your folks, how you maybe might need a coach, what a coach can do for you, and the difference kind of between just supervising people, telling them what to do, and the art of kind of drawing it out of them. And Carina happens to be somebody who I think is quite a genius at that. So welcome, Carina.
Thank you so much. What an intro.
So we're ready for all your wisdom. But I wanted you to first maybe start with telling people who might be new to the idea of exactly kind of what is coaching, how it is that you do your coaching, and maybe, a little bit just so we define it for folks.
Okay. So I guess a sort of overarching technical definition of coaching is working with others to help them get them from where they are to where they want to be. So even that definition requires you to go in with two questions, right? What's happening right now? Where are you? What's working? What's not working? And where do you want to get to? What do you think could be better? What do you want that to look like? So, of course, this shows up in all sorts of different ways. If you're doing individual coaching, then that individual can define that in a number of different areas of their life. Often, most of my work is executive coaching, professional coaching. But of course, you could very easily define that in your personal life as well. Here's what's going on in my life sort of holistically that's working, that I like, that I want to keep building on. Here's what I would like to feel or look a little bit different, right? And then the coach sort of helps that person create a path to what they want and what could be better. So that's sort of coaching in its purest form. But of course, when you get into the professional setting, it takes on some different sort of goals, right? A lot of times there's a very clear set goal that the organization has for an individual. This is a lot of what I do, is that an organization is looking to develop people to be leaders in the organization. And of course, there's skills that people need to develop in order to be better leaders or to be prepared to be leaders, because it's very different than being an individual contributor, of course. So that's a very big thing to navigate, the difference between being an individual contributor and leading people. So that's a big one. And then often somebody just knows, they can just feel it in their own skin that there's ways that they could be showing up that would help them be more effective, more efficient. And they sort of call in a coach to help them figure that out. And then a lot of times the organization will call somebody like me or call upon their leaders to do more coaching in order to develop skills that they see that people could be improving.
That's true, because you do some coaching of managers and people to help them coach their people too, right?
Yeah, I do quite a bit of that, actually. I do some group work with people around training groups of leaders and organizations to all sort of take on a more coaching style in the way that they're leading. And then I also, a lot of times leaders come to me because they feel like they would like to be more effective with their teams. And almost always we end up talking about doing more coaching. That one of the ways they can help their teams be more effective is to go into more of a coaching style of leadership.
I love those first two questions that you marked out, because they seem so like, of course, kind of questions. But I can't tell you how many people, including myself, sometimes go into meetings with some of my staff and don't think to just start maybe with those two questions. We just kind of dig into the work right away. And then at the end, they're like, hey, okay, are you okay? After, and they're like, yeah, I'm fine. Just get me out of here. But
exactly.
Your meeting might go a different way if I just started with those two questions that you said. What did you say? What's happening right now?
Yeah. So what's working for you right now? What's going well? What do you feel good about? And then what would you like to be a little bit different? What's challenging? What do you feel like you need to work on? What would you like to work on?
Yeah.
So, and depending on the situation, there's a million different questions you can ask. And I think, people get hung up on the questions, like what are the good questions? But really it's just ask questions. Most of us, what I see is that most of us are going into these meetings, we're leaders. So because we're leaders and managers, we think we have to go in there with all the ideas and the solutions and the agenda and drive the conversation. And so we go and say, okay, here's what I see happening. And here's what I think could be an interesting opportunity for you. And what if you did this and this? And we just go in with all of our stuff, which is good and generous. And it shows that we're prepared and it shows that we're thinking about the other person, but we end up entirely leaving them and all of their good ideas and everything that might intrinsically motivate them kind of off the table. And just a few questions up front can start to bring that other person into the conversation in a way that's actually going to make your job much easier, because you're going to have so much information about what's going on with this person.
Yeah, and it takes a little more patience, I think, which is why sometimes we don't default to it. But once I think you get it in your bones, it's actually such a better way for them to learn, because we all know this. We all learn better when we come up with the answers ourselves. It's just hard when we're in the seat as the so-called boss or the one who's, supposedly running that meeting. But you're right. The other person running that and taking ownership of their own growth is so much more valuable. And if you can just be kind of a
catalyst, really,
yeah,
right? You're sort of a catalyst that's there to help steer them in the right direction. And look, of course, as a leader or manager who's usually been there longer and is more senior, there are things that that they don't know. There are pieces of advice that are going to be hugely helpful. There are stories that you can tell that they're going to want to hear that'll be useful to them. It's not that there's no place for those. It's just that you'll tell better stories and give better advice if you have a much richer idea of where they're already starting from and what they're already thinking about. As a leader, you want to know how your people think. How are they viewing this problem? How are they thinking about themselves here? How do they see this organization? What do they want? All these things that are going to help you lead them better and teach them better and guide them better. You first sort of have to get curious about where they are. And I think one of the hardest things about that is that, especially if we've led a lot of people or we have a lot of experience, we just feel like we've seen it all. You're kind of like, I know what's going on with this person. I know that I know how they feel. I know what it's like to be there. I know what they need to know. It just feels so much more efficient to just get in there and work based off of your good experience. But of course, again, it's a missed opportunity to really be able to impact an individual based on where they're at.
Yeah. And even if you have seen it before, because let's face it, we're all human and there are some general themes of things that people go through. But if you can just breathe through them, being able to process that a little bit instead of I love when you watch the body language of people coaching and they're like, They're like, get through it. I'm ready
exactly.
to speak.
Exactly.
So what do you see as kind of the biggest things that people come to you either I need this and this, therefore I'm looking for a coach. Can you help me with this? Some themes that you see come up, or people that say, we want you to come in and help our people because we're noticing this, or these are the things that they're struggling with. Are there any sort of themes? Because there might be people out there that are like, oh, you can go to a coach for that. I have that.
Yeah, it depends on the level. And I'm somebody, I really like to coach at all levels. I think I don't want to get locked into just coaching leaders or just coaching the C-suite, because I feel like it's so valuable to know what people are going through and thinking about at every level of organizations. There is this strange divide that is happening. I would love to tell you that there's no generational issue happening right now in the workforce, but I think there is. And I think somebody like me that's kind of going into organizations externally is in a position where, wow, we can really add some value if we're talking to people at kind of both ends of the spectrum. So anyway, I think for folks that are more junior in their career, there's a lot of people wanting to work on their sense of confidence about what they're doing, wanting to feel more comfortable in the way that they're speaking up for themselves, navigating their organization, understanding what's possible for them. Maybe they're starting to, in certain organizations, even when you're very junior, you're sort of starting to maybe have some feedback conversations and with other people and sort of embracing that, embracing the responsibility that people are putting on you, especially with other people. Some people just have work styles that somebody's given them a little bit of feedback on, where they say that it's not very effective, or if you could be a little bit more organized about this, or it feels like you're kind of burning energy or burning hours on this, and that doesn't feel like it's the most productive way for you to work. So, kind of time and energy management is a common theme. And sometimes people come to me because they're feeling that. Those are also issues that people, that organizations call me for, wanting people that they see are quite talented and skilled, but something's in their way. Something's in their way from sort of taking on the sort of next level that they want them to be at. And it usually has to do with kind of bridging this gap into a place where they become more proactive and they're bringing more solutions than answers, right? And they're able to kind of speak up and see problems rather than see something that needs to be done rather than wait to be told what to do. You know, these are all very common transitional moments in people's careers. And sometimes they just need a little bit of coaching. And that's where, as a leader, gosh, I mean, organizations could I hate to do this. I don't want to get myself out of a job, but the amount of money organizations could save if leaders were asking some of these, getting in there and just asking some questions rather than making assumptions about what's going on with all these people in these transitions. Because people do have, it's a wonderful thing about being a coach. Like, people do have very individual, particular, deep set reasons for the things that are in their way and that are blocking them and that are keeping them from sort of seeing the next thing. You know, we all have a lot of the same blind spots, but where they come from and why we can't seem to overcome them is quite unique and different. And that's what coaching can do, is get in there and just shake that loose for somebody.
Yeah, you know, you made me think about how when we're in school, right? So if you're talking about a junior person, they're not far off from being in school. And so when they go from school or college to the workplace, right, all of a sudden you're used to having a reset every year. You're used to having a reset every year, every semester, new teachers, they set new parameters. You kind of get to try something new. I think what's interesting is when we come into the workforce, we often have the same boss, and we don't know, like, when we've changed and grown, we haven't necessarily moved on to something different that's like a demarcation of like, okay, I need to change a little bit. And so I think sometimes people are ready and they might know the job by then, but they're just in this habit of going to their manager for every question to be answered. And the manager's like, why does this person not know this yet? Or why can they not come up with solutions? And it's because they're in that pattern of like, this is the class that I'm in. This is the professor. This is the thing. And if I'm able to say, hey, listen, you're ready. Like, let's take some more risks. Let's try this. What do you think? You know, putting some questions back on them might help them make that change to like the new semester, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. I think we see that all the time. It is hard to make the transition unless it's made quite explicit that that's the expectation now. And then if they're not doing it, kind of finding out, so what's going on? So how are you making decisions about when you reach out and communicate about X? And what exactly are you waiting for here? What do you need from me in order to be able to feel empowered that you can just go ahead and do this? And finding that out. And people have answers. That's the thing. If you say, okay, here's what I'd like to see more of, what do you think you need to be able to do that? What's it going to take? And then this is the really hard part for managers. Then you have to shut up, while they think about it.
Right.
because what we do is that they'll kind of, if there's a moment of silence or they look a little bit uncomfortable with the question, or they're not sure how to answer it, we say, okay, well, let me ask it differently. Or, well, how about if you do that? We just immediately start answering solutions rather than just leaving that space for them to think about it. They do need a minute. You're asking them to think differently about something. You're asking them to start to take ownership in a way that may be entirely unfamiliar to them. So giving them the time and the space to really think about it. And of course, you could even say, all right, well, I've posed a few big questions here. Why don't you schedule 20, 30 minutes on my calendar next week and come to me with some ideas? Because in addition to training ourselves as leaders to kind of go in and ask mode to find out more before we start giving advice, we also have to start training our people to come to these conversations with us, knowing they're going to get asked more questions, and you are going to be expecting them to share a little bit more with you and be able to speak about what's going on and how they're thinking about things. So it goes both ways.
Sometimes I have CEOs say to me when we're training them and kind of coming, when they complain, and they do often, that their people just come to them for the answers all the time. Mm-hmm. And they think of it sometimes as they just want me to tell them what to do so that if it goes wrong, they can blame me and they don't have to take any responsibility. That's what they say in their mind, right? And so when we talk to them about like asking, like when they come asking them questions, putting it back on them, well, what do you think we should do? And you know this client better than me. What is your thoughts? Have you tried anything like that before? What are the potential upside of that? What's the potential downside? Just taking them through a problem solving process through questions. They're like, oh my God, I might as well do it myself. And then we say, well, yes, if you only had that person once, but this is hopefully, a training process that they then get used to those questions, and therefore they don't even have to come to you soon because they know you're going to ask those questions and they go through that process themselves. But what else do you find to help people, because a lot of times they'll say, Christine, I tried it. I ask them questions and they just look at me like, what are you doing? And they think that they're being almost patronizing to them, or they're playing a game with them, like almost kind of mean. Like, why won't you just answer this for me? Why are you treating me like a child? Is the feeling that they have. And like you said, they don't like that uncomfortable feeling. So then they just stop doing it, right? Because it takes practice. But I was curious if you had any advice for that person, because I'm not sure that I have helped them out of that situation when they come back with that kind of challenge.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the most frequent sort of pushback or frustration or complaint that I hear too when I'm working with folks, is just that it just feels so awkward, and it feels like you're interviewing somebody or drilling them, and they're like, what is going on here? It's like all things in life. Like when you're making changes, how you're interacting with people, it's going to be a little uncomfortable for a minute. One thing is you can flag that you're doing it. I'm going to ask you some questions about that because I want to get you thinking about this in a different way. So, you can call it a postmortem. Like, let's do a little postmortem on this call. I want to get some ideas from you. I want to hear how you're thinking about this so that I can respond to where you're at. You can say, like, this is something I want to coach you around. I want to coach you up around how to think about these calls so that you're in more of a position to just run with this versus having to come to me. Just say what you're doing,
Name it.
And yeah, name that that's what's happening and that's what you're doing, that you're not trying to punish them or patronize them, that you're actually just trying to coach them up a little bit. I think the other thing is that sometimes when people get told to ask these questions, they're going in and asking the questions because they've been told it's a best practice, but they're not actually invested in the answers, or they're not actually sort of totally bought into it. And then everybody feels that. So it's kind of, okay, what would you do differently here? All right. So, they've got like a list of questions in front of them that they're kind of going through in order to ask the questions. Versus if the person's a little bit awkward saying, like, I don't know. Okay, well, then what did you think about this? Like, what was your take on, like, you have to actually be asking the question. All right, well, what was your take on X? And you have to actually be curious about what they're going to say. If you're just asking it for the sake of asking it, everybody knows it, right? So if you think you know everything and you think this person across from you has nothing to offer the conversation and that you're just asking them questions because you have to ask them questions, yeah, that conversation is totally going to fail. Right? So there's a whole mindset shift it's a big thing. You have to shift your mindset and believe that people that are junior to you and have less experience than you might actually have an interesting take on things if you can get them to articulate it. Maybe they'll push your thinking a little bit. And won't it be interesting to know what they are taking away from that call and how is it different than what you're taking? Even if it's not great or if it's imperfect, it's half-baked. It gives you an opportunity to coach them or teach them exactly where they are versus where you think they are. So if you can go in like, I'm going to learn more about my person and how they think and how they're hearing this client and what they think about this project, and then I'll know exactly, either I'll get some interesting ideas or I'll know exactly how to sort of coach them and train them from here. So I think so much of it just has to do with that. Are you being genuine, or are you just like working yourself through an exercise because you've been told that's what to do?
Right. Maybe there's a piece where there also needs to be taught kind of listening skills, because you can be taught questioning skills in the coaching piece, but everybody thinks they're a good listener, everybody. But when we do, leadership training and we start asking people, like, what are the worst traits, like the worst traits that some leaders have, listening, like bad listener is always at the top of that list. And yet when you talk to people, no one says, oh, I'm a bad listener. I've never heard anyone really cop to that. I have seen CEOs cop to it when they've been brought through a process and they realize how bad they are in the moment. You know what I mean? Because you've done some sort of active listening.
Exactly. Yes. And I don't know how much you do this in your trainings, Christine, but we always try to practice. Like, because we can talk about this all day long, but until you sit down with somebody and say, okay, let's have a conversation to coach me up on this issue, then it just all gets revealed. And that's when, to your point, like, then they see themselves, how quickly they're rushing to just give me advice rather than ask me one more question. Or how, to your point, the listening, like, are you listening deeply enough that you can spontaneously think of what the next question is that makes the most sense, versus are you listening to them and thinking about the solution that you want to offer, the fact that you've been there before, and the story that you want to tell about the fact that you've had the exact same thing happen to you. Like, most of us are starting to think about those things that we want to say next, right?
Yeah, guilty. I've done that before.
Yeah, well, we all do it. I do it. I still do it. We do it in our personal lives, we do it in our professional lives. So there's a kind of practice and discipline involved. And really, until you sit down and do it or try to do it, you're not going to see yourself and the things that are getting in your way of sort of listening and being a good coach and staying with that person and asking the next question.
Yeah, it's so funny, right? Like, we don't expect students who are learning how to play basketball to know how to dribble from us talking about it, right? We have to practice it, and we know they're going to kind of suck at it to begin with, and then it's going to all of a sudden click in and get better. And I love that, because you're right. We do need to practice and be kind of aware that we're not going to be great at it at first. Even though we might be middle-aged, it might be shocking that we need to get better at this. Almost all of us do. It's just incredible.
I've rarely met a person where it's like, wow, what you should do is talk more and like ask fewer questions and listen less. That would be good for you. That'd really help you.
And it helps because you're really building a pipeline, right? You're telling them, I love that when you said, I'm coaching you up. You said that phrase. I don't know if you realized it even, but that's not a phrase that comes out of my mouth very often, but I loved that idea because it gives a visual to that person that this coaching is not to come down on you or to say that things are wrong, because that's what people are afraid of, right? They're afraid they're going to get in trouble, or they're not doing something right, or they want to be good. So I love that idea of, no, this is coaching you up. This is an opportunity. And it just highlights it for the brain of like, oh yeah, we all want to get better. Okay, that's good.
Yeah. And that's a thing organizations can do, teams can do, leaders can do. The way that you start talking about coaching in your organization is really important, because I would say when I started this profession, most people thought of coaching as they've hired a coach for me to fix me or to make me, because I've got something wrong. And now I would say most people view coaching as an investment by their organization in them. So most companies are only going to pay for somebody to be coached if they think they have a future there. And that's the same thing if you're a leader. Like you're going to spend more time coaching the people that you see some potential in. So to just sort of let that be known, I'm coaching you up on this because I think you're a future leader here. I think I only see good things for you here. So I want to be part of that journey, and part of that's going to be coaching. So sort of the way that you talk about it, and again, label it, frame it, say what you're doing is so important. The other thing I just want to hit on that you said about leaders and sort of accepting that they're going to be bad at it for a while. I do really empathize and feel for senior leaders and executives and how hard it is to do something in front of your people that you feel like you're not good at and put yourself in that place of discomfort. It's very awkward and challenging. So I definitely empathize that it's a tricky transition. If you're not coaching people and you're not doing that thing already, it's a hard transition, but it's totally doable. And there is an authentic way to be like, I'm doing this thing because I know this is the best way to help you. It's going to be a little bit of a shift for both of us, but I just want to be asking you more questions. I want to be sort of facilitating your thinking a little bit more around this. I want to understand how you think so I can coach you up better. It's like all these phrases that can just help you get into it. And then the awkwardness, you've named the awkwardness. And so it's inherently less awkward.
And I think generationally, young people appreciate that. That's exactly one of the things when they talk about transparency. It's that, it's that being able to talk to, they're used to, unlike those of us who are older, we're not used to necessarily our parents being so transparent with us when we were growing up, but they are. So they're used to that. I mean, there's people that will say to me all the time, like young people today have therapists, they have coaches, they are not shy about wanting to grow and get better. Do you know what I mean? It's us, I think, as older folks that we have to kind of catch up and get more comfortable with it.
That's a great point. I think that's so true. And I think that's a really good point in terms of just part of that thing that we have to get used to as leaders is just being in conversation with them more and giving them more information. I coach a number of leaders who are like, well, they don't need to know that, or like, that doesn't feel like something I should share with them. And it's err on the side of, not telling them too much about your personal life or whatever, but they really want to be on the inside, feel like they're on the inside of things. So they don't need to be protected as much as I think that there was a sense with us that we needed to protect people from certain information. And everybody knows everything these days. You can't protect people from information.
Yeah, good point. I love it too. One of the things I get, so I'm going to ask you this question and then I'll give you this example, but I was curious of like, a couple of mistakes that people make going right off the bat. Because I always say that I love the mistake. Like if I read a home decorating book, like a, House of Beautiful or something, my favorite is to skip to the articles that are like, if I could have done it differently, I would have done this, or I would have, not put in this double sink, or I would have, I love people's like mistake stories. And so I was curious, mistakes that you've seen, like that people have done when it comes to coaching, either yourself or other people that you've seen. One mistake that I see that people make is, especially, I don't want to stereotype here, but people that come they hear the word coach and they think of a sports coach. They think that it's like, yeah, good job. Okay, go get him. Or, I need to give you tough love. You need to get in there and do this. And it's very like, the coach locker room speech. So it's either inspiring speech that I give, or it's like, go get him, buddy. Like, non-specific rah cheer for you speech. And so I'm always like, you kind of have to reframe, like, I don't mean that you need to get better at that kind of coaching. Like, you're probably, if you do that, you're probably already good at those things. We all could have a good inspirational speech needed once in a while, or a good cheer for the team.
For sure.
But most of the time, that's not the place that sometimes it's the place that people need coaching, but most of the time it's in the opposite of what you think. It's the coach that steps back and listens and asks questions. And, so you can kind of relax a little bit, that you don't have to be, all of a sudden the best coach on the sidelines for them, cheering and talking and, constantly rah-rahing them. You can kind of just sit back a little bit and think about your friendships. Who are the friends that you have that really listen to you? I always know, Carina, when I'm with you, there's always that moment of like, oh, she's going to make me go deep. She's going to make me go deep. And I, tense up a little, but your way of doing it is so loving that essentially I'm like, I feel good that you're listening to me. And I feel like there's not judgment. It's actually, because my fear is the judgment. But what actually ends up happening is that you come from this place of what I would call love, but it is attention, right? It's attention, but it feels the same way as love does. So even though in the workplace, you wouldn't call it love, you might call it your attention to them. But what they feel like in their brain and their heart is their love. And when you're that way, you can open up and you can be more honest and you can be more of yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. And I think what you're saying now is like really important, Christine, because it touches on that mistake that people make, which is that if you're going to invite people to open up and share and maybe throw out some ideas or thoughts about what they're doing or how they're thinking about things that they're not entirely sure they want to share with their boss, you have to hold that space for them and make it safe for them. So you can't call it love, I guess, in the workplace, although there are articles written that you can. Yeah. But certainly it's things like, the way we tend to talk about it in leadership, I'm sure you do too, is like, you can call it curiosity. You can call it I'm invested in you. I'm committed to your growth. I'm willing to spend time with you because I believe in you. And that's why the listening is so important. The way that you're listening to that person and the way that you respond to them, even an idea that is not totally right, or even if you have to kind of course correct them in the way that they're thinking about what's possible, that you're doing it with this energy that is, I'm sharing this with them, having this conversation with them, asking you to tell me these things because I'm invested in helping you grow here. And that's a hard thing to just teach, right? That's you finding in you the place where that is true for you. I almost think if there's somebody that you really don't like, don't try to do this with them. It's not going to work, right? That
is very controversial, Carina.
Well, you can do other things with those people, but to go in and ask them to be vulnerable and share more, hire them a coach. But that kind of energy that you're talking about is very important. And if, some of us have that to access and some of us don't. I mean, there's a whole other conversation to be had about not everybody should be leading and not everybody should be coaching and not everybody should be, managing even, but that's another thing. But trying to figure out how to hold that space for somebody so that it feels safe to them to have new kinds of conversations with you. But the other thing that you said at the beginning, which was also so true, I think is the other mistake I see the most, which is that people think they're having a coaching conversation. They try to have a coaching conversation when what they really want to do is have a feedback conversation.
Oh, good one. So excellent. This is excellent. Listen to this. Yes, go ahead.
If you see that somebody's doing something, let's do an example. If you see that somebody is not spending enough time proofreading a deliverable before it goes to you or the rest of the team, and you want to give them feedback on the fact that they need to spend more time sort of grammar and spell checking and just doing that proofreading before it gets to you, that is not a coaching conversation. There's this very specific thing that they need to do differently in order to be more effective for you and the team and for themselves. So that's a feedback. That's not like, what's going on with you? And what do you think that's about? And what do you really want to do here? And right. That's like, hey, I think now a feedback conversation should certainly still be a dialogue. Like, go ahead, tell me a little bit about what your proofreading process is right now. But you have an agenda in that conversation. My agenda is to make you a better proofreader to have this result. So like, this is a conversation where we can have a dialogue, but like, there's an agenda here and it's mine and I want a certain outcome. A coaching conversation, if you're saying like, I see there's some opportunities for you to be more proactive, but I really don't know I can give you a few examples of what that looks like, but I really don't know what's going on with you and how you're thinking about these things. And this is sort of like a bigger developmental thing that I want to support you through. And I want to find out what's going on for you so that we can sort of make that happen together. That's a coaching conversation.
Yes.
So really knowing the difference between those two conversations, I think is important. It'll make you better. It'll make you a better feedback giver. It'll make you a better coach if you're sort of distilling when what is appropriate.
Yeah. And defining that time so that it's, I'm giving you feedback, or we're going to have a coaching conversation. And you don't have to have a coaching conversation all the time, right? Because you don't have time for that.
Right.
But you do have deliverables that you have to meet and you have to talk to them about those things. That's a different meeting than this coaching meeting that might happen once or twice a month. It depends on the person and on you. Okay, great mistake, great adjustment somebody can make out there if you've done that. All right. So in our last few minutes, Carina, I want to help people who sometimes it helps me to have a little cheat sheet sometimes by my computer of like starter sentences or starter questions that you've given us a lot of good ones. And I think that you probably don't even know that you say them all the time. Now it's so second nature. But I think for some people like that, they're going, oh, wait, I need some questions. And so, for those of you out there, you can keep them in your phone. Like when you hear someone ask a good question, even friends, like I've seen it with my friends, like we'll all be talking about something or, can you say bitching? I don't know, bitching about something, whatever it is, you're complaining. That's the word, complaining about something. And then somebody asks a question that shifts the entire conversation, that just changes the quality of it, where all of a sudden people start to look inward, start to grow, start to, change a little bit. So I like to think about those questions, keep a little list of them so that you can have one of those kind of change questions every once in a while that helps you. So I thought maybe we could just, if you're up for it, I'm going to put you on the spot, but if we could just go back and forth with like some of those questions. And obviously it's, people shouldn't just lambast people with these questions. This is just so you have some and get used to practicing them. Even practice them at the dinner table or when you go out with your friends, just throw out one of these questions instead of just saying, how was your week? Instead, maybe it's like one of these kind of more change questions. So you got one in mind? What's one you like to use?
So circumstantial, but this is it's a very basic question, but you can always ask it if somebody's bitching about a thing or somebody else. Just like, well, what have you done so far?
Perfect.
What have you said to them so far? What have you done about this so far? What have you tried so far? The thing that does is immediately makes them realize a lot of times it's nothing, right?
It's
a lot of times,
always.
Actually, all I've done is complain about it. So it doesn't even have to be a brilliant question. It's just like, oh yeah, so what are you doing? What are you doing to fix that? Or what are you doing to address that? Or what have you said to them about that? And then it just stops them in their tracks to be like,
yes.
I guess I'm just in love with the problem and I just want to complain about it rather than solve it.
I love it. Yes. And also an interesting one that you've used for me before, and it's so simple that we don't even think about it sometimes. And someone will say something and they're kind of just giving you a hint that there's more under that iceberg, right? But they just say one little thing and they expect you to keep moving on, like just letting that go. But I love just like, oh, tell me more.
Yes.
Just tell me more. And then they always do. And then you always start to get to the bottom of it,
Yes.
So that's one.
Tell me more is such a good one. And there's such other good, the TED, TED, tell, explain, describe. You can pretty much always say, oh, tell me more about that. Oh, tell me so what does that look like? So you could, explain, oh, can you explain a little bit more about what that would look like? Or can you give me an example of that? Or, oh my gosh, describe how that would go down. Right. Or describe what that looks like in action. Right. It's just anything that just make kind of, even if you can't think of like a brilliant question to your point with the tell me more. Right. It just keeps them talking about something.
Yep, I love it. Okay, TED, TED. That's a good tip. The other one I have, and I saw a COO yesterday say this. I met with her and her director of sales, and they were having some issues between the design department and the sales department. And the COO looked at them and she said, okay, guys, what would great look like? And it just shifted them from complaining about each other to like really imagining what it would look like if everybody was working together wonderfully. And then you just saw then they were in solution mode. And I wrote that down. I complimented her later. I was like, that was brilliant. So I love that question. What would great look like?
Yeah. And I think I like, anything, any sort of, if you think about coaching, right? The definition of coaching, it's from getting you where you are to where you want to be. So it's always a question that's kind of pushing people towards, well, what are you doing to get this the way that you want to be, how you want it to be, which involves like defining how you want it, what you want it to look like and how you want it to be. And that's what that same question of doing when you say, okay, well, what are you doing about it? Or what have you done so far? You're just pushing people out of sort of being in the problem into solution mode. Like, well, what have you done? So what do you want to do? What do you think you could do? You can always say, well, what would so-and-so do? Like, what do you think if the CEO walked in right here? Like, what would his advice be about what to do? Or like, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, what would your wife? All the time in professional settings, I'm like, what would your best friend say? What would your wife say? Like, they know you really well. They know what's in your way. What would they tell you to do in the solution? So you can always kind of like bring in other people.
Or what would you tell your daughter to do? That's always one.
If I came to you with this exact same problem, what would you tell me to do? Just like get them out of the thing.
That's a good one. All right.
One thing I want to say though, Christine, if it's okay, is that we're talking a lot about questions, and these questions are how you get people into a different mindset and moving forward, and they can be so powerful. It is an important part of coaching, and this is a thing that you do for me in our friendship better than almost anybody, which is at some point, sometimes, Christine, it's years later. Sometimes it's maybe an hour into a conversation, but you will just sort of listen to me and observe. And then you'll say something like, you know what I've noticed is something that you do, or you know what's so interesting about you, right? And it's always so insightful. And it tells me something that I kind of knew about myself, but maybe I hadn't articulated, or it just gives me a sense of like, oh yeah, this is how I show up in the world. We don't really know how we show up we really need feedback from other people to see how they're perceiving us and to see how they see us showing up. So that's what that is, Christine, is like, it's a thing in coaching called earning the right to advance. And what you earn by asking a lot of questions and really deeply listening and really understanding where somebody's at and how they're thinking about something is then you are in a position to give a thoughtful, real, authentic, deeply understood piece of advice or wisdom or information for that person that is going to resonate in a way that it just cannot resonate unless they've listened to you. That's what coaching is inviting you to do. It's inviting you to listen on a level that the advice that you then give is going to be so resonant and so useful and so helpful to that person that it will change them. And it will change the way they see themselves, and it will change the way that they maybe do something. So both of there's a place for both of those things.
I love that. And that's where we're going to end, on earning the right to advance. Ending on when you get to share your thoughts. Thank you, Carina, so much for joining us today. It was great. And I'm sure we'll have you back again, because this is one of those conversations that we all need to practice. So
practice. Thank you. Always love talking to you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.